Hello, everybody. I am live. Yay. Sorry, the lighting's a little bit uneven today. I have natural light coming in through a side window, and the view is too pretty for me to care about lighting in the corner. I should probably get better lighting in the corner, but that's for a different time. So, thank you for joining me for this Monday Magic Mood Boost. Brief reminder, good morning, Rocio and Jenny and Russ. Your solar return is this week. Happy birthday. I'm so excited for you. And Amber, our wonderful moderator, thank you for being here. Just a brief reminder, next Monday, there's not going to be a live. I'm going to be finishing up an astrology conference that I'm going to this weekend, which I'm really excited about. And then I'm flying to San Francisco to hang out with my one-on-one astrology mentor for a couple days, which is going to be really fun. We're going to walk in a redwood forest and talk about astrology. And I really can't, plus really good vegan food. So name something that I would love more. I dare you. So I'm really excited about that. Hey, Kathy, Chrissy, good to see you guys. So this is a big week, and I want to make sure we kind of get enough time to talk about it. I also, once Liz joins, Rocio, I know, I don't know if you're with Liz or not, but Liz asked last week, I believe the question is why are there so many books missing from the Bible? How do we kind of figure out which books should go in and which ones shouldn't? I did a little research on that. Boy, do I have a lot of information, even just in addition to what I already knew, to put into hopefully just a 10-minute rant for that, but we'll see how the energy goes. So I'm really excited to see you guys here. This is the week where we are going to have Saturn dipping in to Aries. When I say dipping in, I kind of use this, and you're going to hear me say it a lot this year, actually, because a lot of planets are dipping into other signs this year. It's ridiculous. So what we've got is this year, Pluto dipped a couple of years, like over the last few years between Capricorn and Aquarius, and then came into Aquarius to stay at the beginning of this year. Do you remember that? Doesn't that feel like 3 years ago? It was this year. And yeah, awesome. Cool. And if Liz isn't here for the rant, we can always, there's Liz. Okay, great. Great. So Liz, catching you up, I did some research on the question you asked last week, and I am prepared to rant about it today. So first, I want to get into, we were talking about how Pluto has now come into Aquarius to stay this year. And then recently we had Neptune move into Aries. This is also a dip. Neptune is dipping into Aries because when Neptune goes retrograde later this year, they will end up back in Pisces for a period of time. Then they will come back into Aries in early 2026. Also moving into Aries this week, taking the dip into Aries, is Saturn. Saturn is having his first dip into Aries. Saturn will also move back on September 1st into Pisces during his retrograde, then come back in early 2026 as well. And in February of 2026, Saturn and Neptune will perfect this conjunction that they've got going on in Aries. Right now, because Saturn is technically still in Pisces and Neptune is in Aries, that energy isn't as true to form as it will be. But once Saturn on Saturday, Saturn's day, no less, gets into Aries, and being at an astrology conference during that, I think is going to be really hilarious. It's going to be funny to see what happens and then how all the astrologers react to it and immediately associate it to Saturn. There's going to be so much Saturn blame happening on Saturday in Seattle. So say that 5 times fast. Hi, Hunter. It is good to see you. Aaron, hey, so great to see you here. So that's happening. If you are someone with Saturn and Aries in your natal chart, then this is the beginning and possible, more likely, the preview of your Saturn return. Saturn moving into Aries on the 24th of May, which is Saturn's day, is going to be the beginning and the sort of initial preview, like I said, of your Saturn return. Why just the preview? Because, like I said earlier, Saturn's going to go back into Pisces for a bit. September 1st through, I believe it's January, February, Saturn will head back into Pisces. So in this period of time, we're going to see what Saturn and Aries is going to do. We're going to get that beginning sort of introduction kind of energy. And if you have placements in the 0 to 1 degree of Aries, or placements that are square or opposite of that, so that would be any of the cardinal signs. The cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra and Capricorn in that first degree or two of those signs, then Saturn is going to be interacting with your planets because it will either be conjunct your Aries placements, square your Cancer or Libra placements, or opposite your Capricorn placements. These are what we call aspects that kind of create tension, energy, conflict, those kinds of things. So this is why we expect those to show up more. Good morning, Angela. Great to see you. So, Aaron, if you have an Aries moon, uh, Saturn will affect this at some point. So you want to know where your Aries moon is. This is because Saturn is a slow moving planet. Saturn is going to dip into Aries this week, move back in September, come back into Aries again to stay on, you know what? I'm going to get you guys the exact dates here. So Saturn will dip into Aries this week on let me just get this up here. Okay, so on the 24th of May, Saturn moves into Aries for the first time. On September 1st, it retrogrades back into Pisces. Then on February 13th, Saturn will come into Aries, and Saturn will stay in Aries until April 12th of 2028. So again, we have time for this to happen, which means if you do not have a placement at 0 to 1 degrees of Aries, because that's all Saturn's going to get to this year, then you're almost kind of in the clear because Saturn's going to go away and then come back. Now, if you do, you're going to notice that gets hit twice, right? Because Saturn's going to approach it, stop on it, back off, and then come again before moving on. This happened to me during my Saturn return. You can survive it. It's just something that you get a lot of time to work on, and you will be able to make sure that you've got it solid before you move on. So Saturn in Aries is something that we're kind of looking at as a bigger deal than usual. Like Saturn moved into Pisces and we're like, oh, here's what we expect. Why are people making a slightly bigger deal out of Saturn and Aries? Because when we look at how well planets do in signs, there are, for most planets, all but the sun and the moon, each planet rules 2 signs and then has what's called exaltation in a 3rd sign. And so Saturn rules Aquarius and Capricorn. And we had quite the experience between, I believe it was 2017 and 2021, when Saturn was in Capricorn and Aquarius. Saturn was in domicile, was able to function the way Saturn would naturally function. We saw Saturn being Saturn, right? Everything it needed to Saturn, it did. So then it moved out of that and kind of chilled out because Pisces doesn't have anything for Saturn, right? But Saturn exalts in Libra. So if Saturn exalts in Libra, we actually do like to see Saturn in Libra. That brings a lot of justice, a lot of social justice, a lot of balance to things. But then the opposite of Libra is Aries. So if Saturn is in the opposite sign of his exaltation, he's in what's considered fall. And this is a situation where Saturn, if a planet is in exaltation, they are raised up. That's the idea. When they are in their fall, they're actually like in a depression. That's one of the ancient translations for it, was like in a pit or in a dip in the land where they can't even see. So this is a situation where Saturn is so heavy in the energy of Aries that it just drops like a lead balloon. And yes, Saturn does rule lead, so it's very appropriate. So we're going to see that Saturn does not have what Saturn needs, nor the support that Saturn would require in order to do Saturn things. The question here that a lot of astrologers discuss is, does a planet that is not in a situation to do its best, if it's a malefic planet, is that maybe a good thing? Do we not want to support this planet and maybe keep it from being able to do these things? Or does that corrupt what it does even further? So does Saturn in fall make Saturn alleviated, or does Saturn in fall make Saturn worse? This is something that we can look at. Saturn has a pattern of every 30 years or so. So we can go back 30 years. I don't want to talk about that right now because I was alive at the time. So we can go back 30 years and see some of the stuff that was happening. If you are part of the student study of the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom in my Patreon, I'm going to do this for you. In fact, I think you got it yesterday, the newsletter that we kind of walk back and I give you some headlines from 30 years ago. And I encourage the students to go ahead and look at some of those and then make some anticipatory predictions on what we might see, incorporating the fact that during this time, Saturn is going to be conjunct Neptune for this year and next year. So we're going to deal with Saturn conjunct Neptune in Aries, not just Saturn in Aries for that time. Saturn and Neptune are quite opposite in their significations. Saturn likes to draw a hard line. Saturn is going to take your graphite pencil or your ink and say this. Saturn, if anything, is going to make a tattoo, right, with really clean lines. Now, Neptune, conversely, blurs lines. Neptune brings imagination. Neptune brings illusion, sometimes delusion. And so when Saturn and Neptune are together, the hard line gets blurred. Now, really great art can be made out of that kind of thing, but the most structured kind, maybe not. We're getting a little bit more abstract here. It reminds me a little bit of Cubism, where there's a lot of straight lines, but they go bonkers, right? I should really look up what was going on during that. It's actually been about 300 years since Saturn and Neptune conjoined in Aries. They've met up before in other signs, but in this sign, it's been about 300 years. So we've got a lot of looking back to do. And I have gone into that in the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom as well. And I'll definitely be doing more on the research of that as we approach next February when they meet up and perfect that conjunction. One of the things I will say was that was a time of rebuilding. That was a time of kind of the great, it was like a reparation. There was a name for it. I think it was the Great Restoration, where we had just come out of an era where a lot of unfair things happened. And so people were trying to make things more fair. Now, this is one of the most recent conjunctions. I don't believe it was specifically in Pisces, or sorry, I don't believe it was specifically in Aries. But the situation was that we were trying to create a society where everybody had a place, and that we were trying to create those distinctions and those lines to say, this is your portion, this is your portion, this is your portion. It went well in some ways, and it could have gone better in others. Naturally, right? Human history for you. So these are some things that we can expect over the next couple of years, is trying to really put in boxes what works. Can humanity be put in a box? Not often. And we've also got other things going on at the same time. So even though this cycle is happening, and that's a lot, right? Those are some big themes. That was plenty for us to talk about. There is another cycle happening. And in fact, there's more than one. So the planets, we have so many of them to work with. They're always going around, and sometimes they interact with each other, and sometimes interactions with each other happen at the same time. And those create really active years with a lot happening. And when you blend everything together, you can see things that are discreetly, like this one's definitely Saturn, Neptune. This one's definitely, here's another one that's coming up, Uranus, Pluto, which is wild. And then, here's the great news of Jupiter being exalted in Cancer during this time. Now, that's something we're going to talk about on the next live, because in 2 weeks when I come back, we're going to be talking about how Venus and Jupiter will both finally be out of the signs of their detriment and in much better conditions for them. Because since January, you guys, both of the benefic planets, the two planets that can give us nice things, have not been doing well. So they've been trying to give us nice things, but they really haven't had nice things. It's like when you're supposed to have money in your pocket, but somebody replaced it with Monopoly money. So you're like, oh, well, I wanted to be generous, but this is what I have. And that's what we've been working with. And so that's kind of why things have been a little bit rough, and we're just, when I look at the circumstances right now, you just sort of sit and you're like, this is surreal, which is a Saturn and Neptune kind of situation. So surrealism is another thing we can think about as we come into that pattern. So you can see how many things are happening at once, and they all have to fit together, because this is life. This is the world, right? We are many varied, and we do have a lot of things happening all the time. And this is how astrology always works, right? It's always in motion. It's always moving, and it's always blending everything together to create the perfect result of the combination of what the planets are showing. So there's some of that for you. I'm going to catch up on the comments a little bit here, but if anybody has any questions, it looks like I'm probably looking for a question from Chris. I can answer those. We've got tons of time. And then in the last 10 minutes, Liz, I'm going to prioritize your rant request. So hopefully that helps. So, Jackie's here. Awesome. Excited for that. Hi, Jackie. Let's see. Aaron says, okay, so we talked about I have an Aries moon. So Aaron, you want to, like I said, just to summarize, you want to find out where your Aries moon is. And then when Saturn gets to that point, you're going to expect some results from that. Saturn, especially if you were born at night, Saturn is your out of sect malefic. It just means like he's crankier than the other planets in the chart. Mars and Saturn are our two malefics. If you're born during the day, Mars tends to be crankier, and you tend to have situations in your life that challenge you. Whereas Saturn, if you were born at night, is crankier, and your situations tend to hold you back or try to hold you back, and then you have to break through limits. So those are some general ways we could talk about it. Again, if you wanted to have your chart read and let me kind of decipher this for you, consultations are open. My bookings are open on my website. Would be happy to sit down with you and go over your chart, because that is one of my favorite things to do. But Aaron, the moon has a lot to do with you personally, right? The moon is one of our most personal placements, the sun, the moon, the rising. And I would even bring in the ruler of the ascendant, just to spice it up even more, make it more specific. But the moon rules our body. And I know we're like, oh, but I thought the moon was spiritual. Kinda. Actually, traditionally, Saturn was the spirit. Saturn is that fire, right? The soul, that ignition of life. The moon was the body, the physical thing that we're here running around in. And though the moon is the body, our emotions, which is where a lot of the spiritual side of the moon comes from, the emotions are actually the result of hormones in the body. So that is like a bodily function that leads to how our emotions go. And the moon, of course, pushes and pulls on water, and we are made up of a lot of water. So we have that influence as well. Any person who was assigned female at birth relates to this, I'm sure. So knowing that the moon is very much in tune with our body, you want to be careful when Saturn approaches it. You just want to make sure that you don't do anything too hasty. You want to give yourself an opportunity to take it slow, and just make sure you have as much support as possible. So in preparation for a transit like that, I would say start focusing on your health right now, so that you can make sure that, Saturn will make sure that what isn't set up to last will kind of be taken away. So it comes in like a wrecking ball, so that you can build, instead of how they would say a house on sand, you build on stone. So if you start thinking about that now, then you're going to be appealing to Saturn's idea of discipline and support and that kind of stuff. Especially if you were born during the day, it should be even easier to do. But that is something I would want to do in a personal consultation, because it gets personal, and that is something that's for you. So we can get into that if you want to. Awesome. Liz, oh, hang on. Stuff jumped around because I got to the bottom of the chat. Liz says, I got to check my degrees. My chart is 3/4 cardinal signs. Yeah. But just remember, it's a slow process. I remember there was a period of a couple months, because Saturn stationed retrograde on my natal Saturn. So I had Saturn just sitting on me for a while, which not everybody has to deal with. So that, we don't have to worry too much about it. But that 0 to 1 degree is where Saturn's going to get to, stop, and then turn back. So this one, you'd have a similar experience to what I had back in 2020. Again, I'm here. I have found many reasons to be happy in life. All of these things. Did I go through a tough time? Absolutely. Do they happen sometimes in life? 100%. Do we have good and bad, like we have benefic and malefic planets? Totally. Are there blends? Absolutely. So, especially if you're someone like me, I was born with Saturn and Jupiter opposite each other. So when something really, really bad happens, all I have to do is hold on, because typically something really, really good happens too. And if I lean into that, I don't get too sad. When something really, really good happens, I always keep myself measured and disciplined and like all those things, because I know that that's what my Saturn likes. And so I learned the right ways for my style to celebrate. Actually, Dan had some really good insight on that recently. And so it helps me to stay grounded. And that's really good, right? We don't want hopes soaring so high that they actually can't become a real thing. So sometimes you can use Saturn to keep you practical, so that you can celebrate the stuff you have, rather than celebrating what you could have and never living in the moment. So there are ways that we can make this work for us, is what I'm trying to say. Let's see. Cool. Thank you, Amber, for writing those dates in the comments. Aries is my sun. What does that mean for me? Chrissy, so when we get into a question like, what does that mean for me? kind of like what I was saying with Aaron, this is where I would recommend a consultation. There's so much that it could mean for you that is dependent on way more than just a transit of a planet, that I would recommend a consultation. The sun, as I kind of explained, so hopefully this explained it a little bit, is more based on spirit. Spirit means life direction, identity, how we feel about ourselves, but also our vitality, the level of energy that we have. So with Saturn approaching that, you want to make sure that you are not burning yourself out and that you are, because this is one of those things where I would say, like, if you're not taking the hints to rest, Saturn will make you rest, right? So make sure you are pacing yourself. That's where I would go generally. Now, like I said, there's a lot more to get into. I recommend a consultation, not because, I'm trying to bypass your question, but because there's more to you than just a transit. And I would want you to get the full picture. You have your lot of fortune at 1 degrees Aries. Lot of fortune, Ren, really great catch here. Lot of fortune is another really important part of your chart. If you came to me and you said, I want my chart read, but I don't have my birth time, I would read based on your lot of fortune. Ancient astrologers actually considered the lot of fortune to have its own chart. So your lot of fortune's placement would become the ascendant of a whole secondary chart. And then all the planets would be related or in relation to the lot of fortune. How well do they see it? How well are they aspected to it? All of those things you would do normally with the ascendant and the ascendant ruler, you would do with the lot of fortune and the ruler of the lot of fortune. So if you come to me and you say, I don't have my birth time, cool. I'm going to go by your lot of fortune and we're going to go from that. It might be a little bit more based on like, how are you holding up? And some things can get into like, what direction are we going and that kind of stuff. What's going to be most successful in a very like this life situation. So that's something that we can bring up. Lot of fortune represents truly your health, wealth, and well-being, right? So with Saturn coming up there, it's a good time to make sure that you have everything organized and built on solid foundation. We're going back to that. Make sure stuff is built on stone. This is what I tried to do during my Saturn return, which is not the same as when Saturn hits your lot of fortune, right? But when I noticed my Saturn return was coming up, and I, as an astrologer at the time, was like, I'm going to be so good at Saturn return because I'm going to respect it and I'm going to, whatever, do it right. You're going to get what you're going to get. And some of it may be like, oh, that makes so much sense. And you sometimes have to sit with feelings. So Saturn, a slow mover, might also encourage you to sit with a situation. It's going to sit there with you for a while. And it's going to make sure that you process it. That, thinking about Saturn, I remember one of my keywords because it hit my writing in my life. So I remember saying to Dan, like, I need to grieve what I thought my life was going to be when it comes to my writing for a while. And then I'm going to get back up and I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to bypass this grieving. I'm not going to bypass my Saturn return. That is probably, if I were to give advice on what not to do, don't try to avoid it. Lean in, sit with it. One of the things I've been learning a lot this year is how to feel your feelings in your physical body. And I think that that's a really good lesson for a lot of what's going on in the world. But also, if your lot of fortune, your moon, or your sun are interacting with this, make sure you're not bypassing. Yes, we are spiritual people. Yes, we're really excited about all the things we can do spiritually. Yes, that helps us manifest things in the physical world. The physical world cannot be ignored. You're here. There's a reason you're here. And we're going to figure that out, over a period of time. We're going to redefine it over a period of time as we master one thing and move on to a next and whatever. But you cannot bypass this existence, or at least I would recommend you don't. So sometimes we have to take care of our emotions. Sometimes we need to take care of our body and have a better relationship with that. It is teaching you things just like any other mentor is. And so the real lesson that I can get to with Saturn, especially since you're going to have this Saturn transit, all of you who are talking about your Aries placements right now, you're going to have this Saturn transit with Neptune there. Neptune would love to bypass things. Neptune would love to give you an imaginary world to live in so that you don't have to think about the things that don't feel pretty. Let yourself feel all the feelings. Get into them, work with them. And I always recommend one of the best ways to do that is to do it with support. I'm probably not the best support for that because I'm not trained in it, right? I'm trained to read your astrology. A therapist or a counselor or a really good friend or even personal growth books, podcasts, those kinds of resources, those have the training and the true information to be able to support you in the best way. It's like if you're thirsty, don't go to a butcher because you're going to get meat from a butcher. You want water, so go somewhere where you can get water. The butcher's really good at working with meat. That's great. Doesn't make the butcher bad. It just means that it's not what you need right now. Go to the thing that gives you what you need in that moment. Make sure you know what those are. The best support system that you can have is the one that works for you and the one that is appropriate for you. So set that up for yourself now in whatever way you feel. Remember, there are other factors that go into this, right? There are other timing techniques. There are situations in your chart that could make Saturn stronger or weaker. And the placement of Aries and Saturn and the signs of, in this case, I would say of Aries, Aquarius, and Capricorn are all going to be very important. So there's a lot to draw in. If you're trying to interpret that, I'm your person. I'm happy to be your person if you want me to be, because that's what I'm skilled and trained in. So I hope that that's helpful. But yeah, to everybody who's got these Aries placements, I see you. I'm happy to help you. And I hope that this general bit helps a little bit too. Saturn feels kind of grumpy to me, kind of like they woke up too early. Saturn would love to sleep. Saturn, so Saturn, you can compare Saturn to Kronos. You can compare Saturn to Father Time. Those are some of the archetypes. Yes, you can also compare Saturn to the Grim Reaper. So those are the archetypes that Saturn gets: the cloaked, hooded, old or something that's eternal, but about like darker. Saturn is the greater malefic, right? We love Saturn. There are things that Saturn can be useful for, but we also want to respect that Saturn shows us these times where endurance is necessary, where discipline is necessary, where letting something go can be necessary. And so it's one of those important things too. Yeah. So Aaron, you're just about in the clear. If your moon is at 5 degrees, you don't have to worry about that until later next year. You might notice some things coming up because Saturn gets within, I usually when Saturn gets within 3 degrees. So I think you're in the clear for this year. I would say so. But if you notice something coming up, also don't ignore it. Because again, degrees are numbers that are man-made. And the sky doesn't care about that. So if Saturn is close enough and something's coming up and you're like, wow, that feels kind of Saturnian to me, check it out. Just always listen to your gut, listen to your body, listen to the things around you. And Aaron, yeah, you were born at night, so you've got grumpy Saturn. And saving for a booking. Okay, great. That'd be so good. Yeah, trust me, I will go because I know you're also, if I remember right, you're also a Scorpio rising like me. So there's some things that I can get into with that just because I know how your chart is laid out for Saturn anyway. If Saturn is in your chart, actually, no, we haven't talked about where Saturn is in your chart, but I know where Aries is in your chart. And Aries for you is going to be 6th house stuff. So 6th house topics are like your day job, your health, your stress levels, those kinds of things. Be on top of those. But again, we'll get into more of that in a consultation if you wanted to jump in with it. There is, thank you, Amber. There's also a free Patreon tier, and you will get a weekly kind of what's going on situation with brief recommendations. Student study tier gets a second, more in-depth newsletter every week as well, with actual spells to work with that week and more in-depth into what the astrology is. And I know Shauna's not on here live, but Shauna, I know you've been asking about aspect theory and stuff. I'm showing you the Thema Mundi in a couple of weeks, and I'm very excited about it. I love the Thema Mundi. The Thema Mundi is the birth chart of the world. There is one, and it's really cool. There's a lot that we get from that. Okay, cool. Let's see. Saturn is kind of like the Tower card. Yes. Saturn would be like the Tower card. Saturn would also be, so in modern astrology, I would bring Pluto into the death card. Traditionally, when they didn't know Pluto existed, they would probably have used the archetype of Pluto, the deity, for that. But also you can think about Saturn in that way too. Something ending for something else to begin. So just being willing to let go of something so that it can be different. Um, and yeah, we do have the Alchemist Inkwell podcast. We'll be filming another episode of that today. We just got a new program for it, so the quality is even better. I'm super excited about that. So yeah, please feel free to watch the Alchemist Inkwell podcast or listen to it wherever you get your podcasts because it's fun, and Em and I have a really good time doing it. Um, thank you, Russ, for your commendation with that. Cool, 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 cool. Uh, didn't realize a lot of fortune was that important. Yeah, yeah. You just recently added it to your chart on Luna. Here's my thing: it should be automatic on Luna. It should be automatic in every chart calculation. It is actually really important. Valens, like I said, so Valens wrote the anthology. It's one of our earlier, more complete manuscripts of astrology that we have to work with. And he really gets into the Lot of Fortune. The Lot of Fortune is important to him also because he does zodiacal releasing. He's really the only one that does that. So he got really into how can I derive so much from the different lots. There are tons of lots. The Lot of Fortune is one of the most common because it's between the sun and the moon. The other one that's between the sun and the moon is a lot of spirit. A lot of fortune relates to the moon. A lot of spirit relates to the sun. But I use both of those because I also do zodiacal releasing in a consultation, in addition to about 3 or 4 other timing techniques. So you'll learn all about it if you do decide to have a session with me. But yeah, Russ, highly recommend getting into a lot of fortune stuff if you're studying. Um, yeah, Jenny, I actually remember back in I call it mental astral math. You said it's so cool how you're able to figure out a chart. So it actually is really easy once you get kind of used to it. Sometimes I still get it wrong. My brain is so bad with mental math, even when it gets into astrology. But in some cases, I'll be like, oh, well, if that's your rising sign, then I know the rest of your chart from there. It's actually that easy. So rising signs make everything so much easier. And because in this case, Aaron is a Scorpio rising, so am I. So that made it really easy for me to know where the signs were because it's the same as mine. But you can derive it. I remember I was on a brief pre-magic. Someone was hiring me to do special magic for them, which by the way, you can do too on my website if you wanted to. And so I had a phone call with them and I was just going through like what's going on. And they were telling me about their situation. And they were kind of giving me they gave me their big three just off the cuff. And I was like, well, if this is your rising, then this transit's happening for you here. And if you're this age, like you said, then here's the sign that's activated by perfection. So just by these things you said in one sentence, yes, I can figure out a lot of what's going on for you, but it also helps me understand what we should do to help it because we've diagnosed who's the culprit behind these problems. Now let's fix it. Let's do the things that are going to help you get through the period of time, not bypass it, and then work towards what's going to help you build what you want after this situation. So how can we honor the time that we're in and also keep our hope up by knowing what we're shooting for here? It was really cool. It was I actually kind of impressed myself on the phone because I was like, well, that means this. And then because anytime I accomplish a mental math feat, I'm impressed with myself because it's so hard for me. So I was secretly giddy on my side of the phone for that. Um, yeah. Guessing based on what I've been thinking about lately, combined the Aries influence, might be time to learn to feel my anger. Aries is a fire sign and it's cardinal. So think about striking a match, right? So, yes, Ren, this is a great lesson for everybody because everybody's going to have Saturn in Aries, right? Saturn in Aries is what the weather is. And so we're all going to be experiencing that in parts of our chart, wherever Aries is. And it's really important to be able to sit with, feel, and understand your anger and to learn the difference between action and reaction. So, yeah, Ren, amazing. Great point. Hey, Meg, good to see you. Awesome. I think we're caught up on questions. Is it rant time? It's only 10:30. I don't know. I don't feel like the bubble up for the rant just yet. So I think we're good. I actually rants for me are pretty channeled. So I do, I know. I am Mars ruled and my Mars is in Pisces. So I love to rant about metaphysics and religion and all of those things and pretty much anything that bothers me. Ranting is how I process things. Makes total sense when you look at my chart. It's always rant time. Yeah. Let me see here though. Lot of fortune added before Chiron, in your opinion? Absolutely. Lot of fortune is about you, and it's very important for you. Chiron is a dead comet that wasn't even visible until like the 70s of the 1900s. So it's this tiny thing that it's actually not visible without a telescope and stuff. So Chiron is not something that I would put in your chart right away. I would not worry about asteroids slash comets until you have a good foundational understanding of the chart as a whole, because it's going to confuse you. I remember even like it was a couple years ago I started incorporating asteroids into my practice, and for a while I was angry. I was like just so irritated with how busy the chart got that I wanted to just swipe the whole thing clean because there was so much on there. It's like you're just actually confusing my interpretation now. It's not helping. Chiron has a lot of. I actually have a rant about Chiron a couple weeks ago, Aaron, and I separate their rants into their own playlist, so you can go on my YouTube and check out my Chiron rant. But Chiron gets a lot of credit because Chiron is the wounded healer. And so a lot of people in today's era are trying to figure out, how do I take this stuff that I don't like that happened to me, but that I've healed, and help other people with it. And so they get into that. But that is a nuancy situation. So if you're getting into your astrology and you're saying, what does this mean for me? I would focus more on not the asteroid stuff just yet, unless you're getting into therapy, in which case we can get into the asteroid stuff because you're probably working a lot of that in therapy. Asteroids will give you thematic things that can show up in your life as added nuanced detail to the things that are promised by the actual planets. So for me, the most important things are this, and this hopefully is really helpful. When you're looking at your astrology chart, here's my priority, right? Look at your astrology chart, learn the traditional 7 planets and the signs. Once you understand what those are, how they work, the idea about them, we're actually in signs now, getting really in depth with signs in the student study on my Patreon. So if you want to join us there, we've talked a little bit about planets. We're doing signs. We'll get more into planets later as well. So it's a really good time to join if you're wanting to start understanding the chart from the ground up. Learn the planets and the signs, including how they look on the chart, right? Memorizing those glyphs for the signs and the planets, probably one of the most foundational, you just have to memorize it things you'll run into in astrology. Most of the other stuff, at least I can connect to something else and give a reason for. And that way it makes it easier to learn. Astrology is very much about patterns. So once you get those glyphs, then you can start making patterns, and it feels a lot easier, especially if you're neurodivergent. It's probably why so many people who are into astrology are neurodivergent. Makes for amazing conferences like the one I'm going to this weekend. So learn your planets and your signs, okay? Because that can give you so much to start with. After that, you're going to start learning aspects, but I would stick with what they call traditional aspects as well, because they added a bunch of aspects in the 1900s to create even more nuance that we actually have ways to do in traditional astrology, but we didn't have the manuscripts for them yet. So what they were doing and like coming up with in the early 1900s, we actually found the OG method for that. So you can learn that first. I recommend learning from the bottom up with astrology because you want to build that good foundation. And when you encounter something and you ask a question, you want to be able to fall back on, how was it done before? Do I like this better? It's not that you have to do it one way or another, but you have to be able to compare. You have to be able to discern for yourself. So having all of the information and building on it gives you a good foundation to say, well, I already know how to do this, but if this feels better, maybe I'll do this too, or instead. That's up to you. I have found the most value for myself in traditional astrology. I have Saturn in the 3rd house Capricorn opposite Jupiter. So like traditional stuff appeals to me. People are different. But that's what I would recommend. So then you can get into aspects. Aspects are, what conversations are the planets having with each other? Are they supporting each other, or are they kind of beating each other up a little bit? And that's something to really think about. I'm making sure I double check my conversation here. Da, da, da. So yeah. um, I think that answer, I kind of got myself off on a tangent there. But then after that, like you can get into tons of stuff with that. Like I said, asteroids are so Nuancy, they're impressive. Don't get me wrong. They are impressive. They are going to be the things that are like, whoa, I feel like I'm being watched almost. It's so accurate. Like in my chart alone, my birth name, Krista, is conjunct exactly the ruler of my ascendant. The ascendant is about your personality and like your identity leading into life. So Krista was always going to be my name. My name was supposed to be Krista, but Krista Amber sounded stupid, so they named me Krista Lynn. But Krista was the name my parents picked before my brother was born. So yes, that was always going to be my name. He was a boy, so he didn't get it. I was born female, and they wanted it to go to their daughter. My parents use my pronouns now. Really cool. But I still really like Krista, and I love Krista Lynn. I think it's a really cool thing. Plus, it means clarity, which is fantastic because I like making things clear. My middle name is Amber. Hi, Amber. Which actually in ancient, I believe it was Sumerian, meant sky. So clear sky. And then Sophia is my chosen last name, which means wisdom. So my name means clear sky wisdom, and Sophia with an F is does have an asteroid, and it's in the place where the name I am known by is identified in my chart. So that asteroid is there. And then on my sun, in my descendant, where marriage and partnership shows up, the asteroid Daniel happens to be conjunct my sun. I married Daniel. And I found all this stuff out long after. I only actually found these things probably 2 or 3 years ago. Dan and I have been married for 9 years now. So it's incredible how specific these things can be. Then, if you want to get into themes, right? Everybody knows I've got a relationship with Sekhmet. The asteroid for Sekhmet is conjunct my Jupiter in the ninth house. So, yeah, she and I have a relationship. And I found that after my first encounter with Sekhmet. Lots of Egyptian deity asteroids are in my chart. I'm very close with the Egyptian and Abrahamic deities. Let's see. My genetic ancestry shows up in asteroids in my chart. There's an asteroid for Kiev, and my family comes from a Ukrainian background. So it gets nuts. Even Athena, who is the one Greek deity that I work with kind of more often, shows up in my chart. So it's really neat what you can get into there. But notice how that's more of like the, oh, that's cool, as compared to the what's going on, what do I need to get through this, like what's coming up in my life. It's more of the context of my life, right? So if you're having a time where you're like, man, I have no complaints, God bless you and congratulations. But if you're in a time where you think, I have no complaints, but I still want to play around with astrology, this is where it comes in a lot. Or again, if you're like, how can I heal something on a very spiritual soul level? In my psyche, more like, you can find asteroids. The amount of people that I've run into in this era that we are in with Persephone asteroid placements, and then they're dealing with similar themes to what Persephone went through. That's how the asteroids work. So then this is something that's in my life. My recommendation, this is my recommendation. It's not something you have to do, but my recommendation is if you find something like that in your chart, now you know what to tell your therapist. Not I have Persephone, the asteroid in my chart, but I've noticed that I identify a lot with this particular myth because of this thing that happened in my life. And I would like to work on healing that. The healing part comes to Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer. Chiron is also the centaur who trained heroes and came up with natural remedies and herbalism. So he's credited as like our earliest pharmacist. Also would like to shout out Circe for that. Don't know why she doesn't get more credit, but Circe is also a pharmacist. So just saying. We're reading Circe right now in the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom Patreon's book club. So if you wanted to learn more about Circe, we're reading that and you could join us there too. So, hey, Misty. So that's where you can see the asteroids pop up like the stories in our life and the tropes of our lives, right? So astrology itself gets into fate and fortune and relationships and status and all this stuff. And then on top of that, probably why we discovered asteroids in the 70s, because we were able to identify them with math, science, and telescopes. Then they finally started naming things after female representation. And that's really the most we get in astrology. So the other benefit is a lot of more representation of feminine themes. Much of astrology was written by men for men. And so when you get into the asteroids, which were given more goddess energy, you finally get more representation for that. So that's something, as the divine feminine is coming back in and we're reclaiming that, it's also useful in that. Demetra George has a really great book that is a little mildly outdated, and she admits this too. I've trained under her for how she would also bring that in. So if you want asteroids and you want a consultation with me, let me know, especially if you have an asteroid in mind. If you're like, hey, I resonate with this deity a lot, can you let me know about that? It's easier to work from the asteroid back than it is to work from the chart to asteroids, because there are like 2,000 named asteroids. And I would have to come up with this ephemeris thing. And it's a lot more, it's a lot more to do. Not that I wouldn't do it. It's just harder to access that information for me. If I can search an asteroid and then find it in your chart and then see if it's important, great. A couple people in here, we have done asteroid work together, and it was really cool. So I hope that was clear. Sorry if I rambled a little bit much there. But it did bring us up to a pretty good period where we could get into the rant. Let me just really quickly, let's see. May I ask a sigil question when you're ready? Jenny, if you haven't already, go ahead and start typing that. Okay, Aaron, you said Saturn's in Sagittarius for you. I think I'm a different Aaron. You might be. Yeah, sorry about that if I've assumed you were someone else. My bad. Still excited to have you here, though. Okay. How do you charge a sigil? Like when you're using something like the evil eye, is there a certain way to do that? There are many ways to do that. Sigils have a varied way of doing things. So you can charge a sigil by putting it under a crystal, under the moonlight. You can charge a sigil by putting it near something that is attuned to what you want it to do. Like if it's a sigil for money, put it in your wallet, and then you're kind of charging it up with that same energy, or put a coin on it so that it knows what money is. You can just touch it and think and meditate on it. I wouldn't say necessarily that I can think of a wrong way to charge up a sigil. You can kind of come up with a little spell to go along with the sigil and say it at the right time, maybe on the day of the week that goes along with it. If it's a sigil for protection, you could do it on Saturday and, light a candle on Saturday and write things around it that you would want, that kind of stuff, if you want to do like a full altar situation. But sigils are really flexible in that. Even to me, my process of activating the sigil is making it. So I do try to draw it by hand at least once, or if I'm doing it on, like, if I do it in Canva because I need the lines to be cleaner and prettier for a client, I will make sure that I'm also like, I'll take my fake pencil and trace over it so that I'm activating it, or just meditate with it. So pretty much, I can't think of a way to do it wrong. That doesn't mean there aren't any, but I can't think of one right now. But that's kind of my multiple methods that I would consider for that. Great question, though, Jenny. Would you look at the historical context on how to charge that type of sigil because it has been around for a while, or go to your intuition to charge it? I hope that's not confusing. So I don't think, especially when you're talking about the evil eye, that's been used for a long time. And I'm not sure that they traditionally charged it the way that we do. Consecration is the closest thing I can think of, where someone would have taken a talisman and consecrated it by saying a prayer over it. So you could choose a prayer. The evil eye is used cross-culturally in a lot of situations. So doing your best research, especially for like the intention of it, what you might be most connected to, that kind of stuff, seeing if there are any prayers about that. I know Italian folk magic has a lot to do with it, or uses it a lot. And even in Italian folk magic, they're not necessarily consecrating the evil eye, they're just drawing it. And so that is enough in the Italian folk magic grimoires I've seen. It's also, I believe, used in, I've seen it in some Ozark folk magic. It's almost universal. And they just draw it. But there are like some people will use specific Bible verses because it's attuned to what their intention is. So think less about the eye itself and more about what you're using the eye for, and go with that if you're trying to look for things that you would say. Um, yeah. So I hope that helps. Um, but yeah, I would honestly, in my personal practice, I would do both. If I were unsure of something, I would research it. And because I have researched this one, I feel like I've encountered the evil eye in so many, especially like Mediterranean and upper African areas. Um, but I would say that there's no necessary consecration required for them. They just put them in place, and just knowing that it works is a big deal. Um, yeah, 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 Liz. Yeah, that's a recent development, but it was actually on my birthday that it started. So I'm very excited about that. My birthday was a big turnaround this year. You could tell Venus took over as Time Lord. Um, yeah. Yeah, I am an honorary Amber. Yeah, I don't use the middle name a ton, but it's there. It's magical so many levels. Yay! Yay! I love your Fae guides, Missy. Um, Also, I know your name is Misty, and that sounded in my ear even as Missy. I'm wearing Invisalign, and sometimes that really messes up the way I talk. So just know I know your name, and I hope that I didn't offend when I accidentally brought it out the wrong way. Um, Yay. Kathy, me too. I love that this feels like a hangout. It's one of my favorite things about this. Please feel free to tell your friends. Invite anybody you want to this hangout, as long as they're going to be respectful, because it's fun. It's great. Recently found Pallas. Pallas. So everybody who's wondering, Pallas is also Athena. Pallas Athena is the asteroid. Is conjunct your Mercury in the fourth house. So you guess that's your why Athena has always reminded you of your mom. Really great. The other thing I would say, fourth house is family, upbringing, and that kind of stuff. I would also look at and see if your Mercury and Pallas are opposite anything in the 10th house. Because believe it or not, in more modern astrology, we use the fourth house for mom because we also think about that as the home. Traditionally, the fourth house is the father. It's the root, right? So your roots come from the paternal side, blah, blah, blah. Unless your mom raised you like more closely, sometimes the mom can have an energy of paternal influence. Um, Traditionally, then the opposite of that, the 10th house would be the mother too. So just out of curiosity, because I researched this, um, check out the 10th house too and see how it might interact with things in your fourth house. Not saying you're wrong. You're not. I just am curious. Cool. Okay, great. It looks like I'm caught up and Russ wants a rant. Um, Misty, that was great. Okay, cool, Ren. So even more affirmation for what you picked up on there. Good astrology. I love that. Okay, who wants to hear a rant? Let me see if I can fit this in. I might actually, I'll go over if I have to, because you asked for this one, and I'm not going to cut it short if I don't have to. Okay, so this is going to be a rant that was requested last week in our Monday Magic Mood Boost, and correct me if I'm wrong because I know you're here. So the question was, why is there so much confusion about which books are in the Bible, which books are not in the Bible? I'm also going to bring in sort of translations of the Bible too, because this really is kind of an interwoven topic. Let me know how that sounds to you guys. I will make sure to draw in what's going on in the chat with what I'm saying as much as I can. So my goal here is to be as grounded as possible. I'm going to stick a heavier stone in my lap because I could go wild with this one. So here's the thing, especially when it comes to the Bible, but not even only the Bible, right? Just a lot the Bible, because there's so much pressure on it. First and foremost, the Bible is a book. It's a book. It's not even really a book. It's an anthology. It's an anthology. Okay, the Bible is an anthology. Can we just let it be an anthology for a second? And then when you allow it to be an anthology, now that'll help open your mind to this. Actually, even for the student study of the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom, we are doing an analysis in a couple weeks. Look forward to this, guys, about the criticism of witchcraft in the Bible, what it actually means and what it's actually talking about. And does it actually hate people who do magic? Spoiler, no. So that's for later if you're in the student study. And maybe even later, I'll bring it to more of a free forum. But it is an anthology. If you've ever contributed to an anthology, if you've ever read an anthology, you know that the stories in an anthology, the stories in an anthology are separate from each other. So while some of them may work cohesively together, fantastic, they are not things that were written one after the other by the same person to be a cohesive singular storyline. That is not the Bible whatsoever, actually. The Bible as we know it, especially let me backtrack a little bit here. This is important. The Bible isn't even the book of a singular religion or a singular culture. One of the things that's really interesting about Abrahamic religions is that they disagree with each other on very crucial points. Case in point, that this affects all three of them in the Old Testament. We have the story of Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham, right? By the way, yes, Liz, the Bible is actually full of spells as well. The Psalms, many of them, not all of them, many of them were actually Canaanite spells and prayers. And many of the Psalms are just mostly David attributed, complaining about why God abandoned him. And saying, like, don't do that anymore. So we also are allowed to question God. It's in the Bible. It's in the Bible a lot. And God changes their mind in the Bible a lot. And God is not even the same God sometimes in the Bible. And yes, the Bible does allow for multiple gods. Those are totally separate rants I could get into, but now you know. So, thank you, Jackie. So, when we get into the story of Father Abraham, I have the song stuck in my head. I'm going to try to get around it. We traditionally know if you come from either a Jewish or a Christian background, you might think, oh, Abraham and Isaac, right? Abraham had a couple sons, but was supposed to have one with Sarah, did for the longest time. So had one with Hagar, who was another wife of his that Sarah was like, hey, I'm not going to have kids, even though God said I should. So because I'm not going to wait for that, I'm old. You should have one with Hagar so that your line can at least continue and we'll pretend that's our kid. So Abraham and Hagar have, in our version, Ishmael. And then Sarah gets pregnant with Isaac, starts hating Hagar because jealousy. And from there says, send Hagar and Ishmael out. And Hagar and Ishmael get sent out into the wilderness. They nearly die to the point where Hagar is like, hey, I'm going to hide my child in this bush. This is another topic I'm going to get into. The age of Ishmael during this period contradicts itself in the very same Bible that you are reading. So in one, he's like a little kid. In another one, he's already a teenager. When you see him in comparison to Isaac in some of the passages, he's a teenager already. In others, he's still a baby. The Bible does contradict itself. So that's another thing to get into. However, back to the wilderness. In the wilderness, Ishmael starts crying because he's afraid he's going to die. Legit, that can happen. And God hears Ishmael crying, comes to Hagar and says, you know what? We're going to make a nation of him too. Don't worry. You're going to be okay. Saves them. Yeah, that happens. Except if you're in the Islamic culture. Because, and I confirmed this, you guys, when I was with Hani in Egypt, I ran up to him at the Zohar temple and I was like, hey, I read this year in the footnotes of my Bible that in your version of the Bible, Isaac was born first and cast out, and Ishmael was the one that was taken to the top of the mountain and almost sacrificed, but then not sacrificed, and was then the start of Abraham's line, right? Yeah, that's how it is. So I read about it and I confirmed it with someone who is of that belief system and grew up in it and knows it really well. Hani is incredible. So yeah, right? So just to get you started, one of the reasons the books of the Bible are the way they are, and this is more of a translation thing, not even a translation thing, but just a choice, is the narrative, right? People need a narrative to fit what they need their people to believe. Much of the Old Testament of the Bible was actually for the purposes of making sure that the Hebrew people didn't lose faith in their God while they were in exile from Babylon. So all of this stuff that was like, don't worry, this happened and this happened and this happened. They were also taking it into the context to be like, I swear this happened, you guys. Please don't, stop believing in our God. We'll be restored one day. Don't you worry. Like, God hasn't abandoned us. And here's why. God, I hope that's true. And that's the idea. That's what happened. So their scribes had and their priests had to get on it and be like, okay, we need some stories. They're going to keep the people's faith so that they don't, I'm assuming, so that they don't assimilate into a different culture and suddenly be okay with this. That's my assumption. But either way, they needed a narrative, which is why I'm reading right now Second Samuel, or Samuel 2, however you want to say it, which is talking about David and a lot of his conquests post Goliath. And then I'm also reading at the same time, because of the way I set myself up, and boy, is it a lot, Psalms, because some of the Psalms are relating back to this. And also, what's it called? It's about keeping records. I can't remember what the word is right now. But anyway, it's a whole separate book of the Bible that is about, I'm going to remember the word eventually. But anyway, it's a whole separate book that retells it. So if you've ever tried to read the Bible and you get to like son of, son of, son of, son of, son of, and then 2 books later, you get to son of, son of, son of, son of, son of, and then one of those, if you care to stick with it, you'll find that the one of the son ofs is different because they're changing the narrative and they're saying, well, right now I need this to be true. And so it's not Deuteronomy, but thank you, Russ. I don't know. Maybe I'll get there. I had it a second ago and it's one of those things. But so Chronicles, it's Chronicles. So Second Samuel and Chronicles tell parallel stories. But in Second Samuel, you're getting like, David slept with Bathsheba and had her husband killed. Whoops. And then in Chronicles, you're getting, we're not going to talk about that because it makes David look bad. And we don't want you to think David was bad. We want you to think David was good because we need you to keep believing in all of this stuff because it's important so you don't abandon the faith. So again, the agenda and the narrative become very important. So I'm going to kind of leave it there because we're already after 11. I'm not going to stop the rant though. We're still going. So translation issues are another thing that happen. Over the years, we have situations where a word in Hebrew or in Greek or even later in Latin don't translate perfectly to something else. This happens across the board. If you want to read more about this, I recommend a book called Portable Magic by Emma Smith. It's not super long, but it's super fascinating. And it even gets into just how the book as a thing was used, even when it wasn't being read. Another thing it gets into, speaking of narratives, right, is the way translation was used for an agenda. When missionary stuff became really popular, especially as they were in the New World, the first Bible translated into a Native American language it also incorporated things that the Native Americans already believed so that they would start believing in the same stuff in the Bible. So that Bible that was translated into their language, which is like, look, we made our book in your language to be inclusive, made up a lot of stuff so that it would make it easier for them to convert. Agendas. It happens a lot. So you got to be really discerning with your translations, not only in biblical stuff, but even in astrological stuff and everything. When there is a translation, there is room for error. And so you want to be as faithful as possible. This is why we have multiple translations of Greek myths as well. I highly recommend, I think her name it's Emily something, who just recently did the Odyssey and is also now doing the Epic of Gilgamesh. Just remember Emily, she'll show up. Really great covers. So agendas, missionary work, translation issues, the patriarchy. You can't forget the patriarchy. For this one, I recommend actually reading Mysteries of the Dark Moon by Dimitri George. It really explains how the matriarchal system got canceled out, and it compares a lot of feminine myths like Pallas and Athena, and it shows you how they were revised and rewritten to fit that same agenda, similar to how the Old Testament was done to say like, hey, we don't want you to lose faith in this. So we're going to rewrite this story a little bit to make it easier for you to keep the faith the way we want you to. And so the same thing, of course, happened with strong female characters, especially even in the Bible. So I need to find really good sources for this one. But there is evidence to suggest that Mary, think Mary Magdalene, and Martha, the two, I believe. I think there was one other person. I think it was like maybe another Mary. Mary and Martha were supposed to be the ones who had found Jesus in the tomb, except there's evidence to suggest that Mary was given such importance in the Bible that they split her into two people to make that one person not as crucial to the story and not get as much credit. This happens across the board in all deity pantheons. The female deities get lowered. In fact, there's only one book in the Old Testament where they're like, this part of Exodus may have been written by a woman, because they actually give women credit for something. They don't know that it was written by women, but because it gives women credit for something, they're like, it might have been. And then you only get like a couple women in the Bible. Most notably, we'll talk about Esther, who is just a very short story, like a slice of life storybook in the Bible, super short, about what the ideal wife would be like. Rude. So anyway, that's more. Emily Wilson is the one who did the translation of the Odyssey. Thank you, Amber. Okay, cool. And then you get into arguments about theology, right? So the Council of Nicaea, which we've all heard about, was presided over by Constantine. Dude, I can't stand Constantine. That's a whole other rant. Constantine bugs the heck out of me. The Council of Nicaea had this guy named Arius. Arius was kind of in his own little team of, I believe his idea was that Jesus was always a god, and like we didn't have to worry about anything else. But there was this argument in the Council of Nicaea of like, is Jesus fully God, or is Jesus partly human, or is Jesus fully human, or is Jesus human until he's on the cross and then he has this moment where he becomes a god and that's why he can like, that's where we got into, right? The theological debates of this then led to a whole religious movement that actually Arius got exiled because everybody hated him so much. And then for some reason, Constantine decided to finally convert to Christianity on his deathbed and had Arius baptize him, which made Arius suddenly popular. And then Arian Christianity, or the perspective of it, became the way to go. And we're still talking about it today. We still don't know if the Eucharist is supposed to actually be the body or not. That was another thing that was considered at these councils. Is this the body of Christ, or is it bread? What was Jesus really talking about? So there's a lot to go into. Then you get into deeper views, because Christianity isn't just Christianity, right? We have it's not even just Christianity. Go back to Abrahamic, right? You've got your Jews, the Islamic perspective, the Christian perspective. Among the Christians, there were the Gnostic Christians who were like, by the way, I don't think the Old Testament God is the same as the God throughout. I think that's the demiurge. And I think he's punishing us by existing here. And we need to like supersede our physical limitations and achieve gnosis, wisdom, through, they also were very patriarchal. So they took their wisdom deity, who was also like the Holy Spirit. So they were Trinitarian. And they were like, Sophia made a mistake by trying to create without her masculine counterpart. Ooh. And so that's why all of this exists. We are all a mistake by a God who doesn't realize that they were born of a mistake, because Sophia gave birth to the demiurge, which doesn't realize that it was cast out from actual creation, and so is only able to make imperfect things. Hi, we're imperfect things. So that's where that comes from. Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? And so some of that is like, okay, it's also one of the things that mentions the archons in that are supposed to be the planets. And so astrology is there underneath as well. So are many of the mysticisms and esoteric things. In fact, if you read some of the books of Moses where we talk about Enoch, who was so wise and so close to God that instead of dying, he just continued to walk with God off into the wilderness, disappeared, and never had to die. But also Enoch's narratives tell about angels giving us things like astrology, alchemy, makeup, and weapons. And so all of a sudden, well, we don't want astrology because that means that our free will is taken away from us. And Jesus took away that limitation. Jesus saved us. We all have free will. Everybody else is trapped, but not us, because we got Jesus. So the archons are bad. There were 7 visible planets that were in play, right? They became the 7 deadly sins. But for every sin, they needed a redemption, right? So you got your 7 heavenly virtues to contrast that became angels. And thus did daimones, or spirits, become demon. Translations, right? And then we got angels from there, which is messenger, which, by the way, in the Bible, angels are supposed to be just emanations of God in that moment, doing one thing or another. And Satan is just adversary. So sometimes an angel shows up as a Satan in order to make someone deter from the path that they're on, to just knock them off so that they don't do the wrong thing. There it is, right? So much to get into. Wait, the planets were propagandized into the seven deadly sins. Yeah. It bugs me. Um, and then to get into the books that made it in and the books that didn't, right? So getting really to the root of this question that we started out with, we have the books that made it in and the books that didn't. Some of them, like, we have a bunch that say things that they didn't want people using, right? It didn't go with other things that the church was trying to support. So those books got taken out. Except if you're Catholic, you get to keep the Apocrypha. If you're not Catholic, you don't get the Apocrypha. If you want to read a book of the Bible that is as complete as we can get right now, I recommend the Oxford Annotated Bible. There's a 5th edition. Apparently, there's a new one coming out. I don't know when. So if you want to get started on that, there's also an ebook version. It's a lot cheaper. So the Oxford Annotated Bible is where I got a lot of this information from, it, by the way. I read the footnotes and I read the introduction essays, and they're really, really helpful for providing context. If you don't want to read the footnotes and the introduction essays, keep asking me questions because I'm reading them. I'm spending the whole year doing it, and I'm comparing things to each other historically, chronologically. So hopefully that helps as well. So some of these are the reasons. It's not the whole reason, right? But if we break it down, it comes down to, what did they need people to believe? What did their people need in order to keep hope and faith at the time? What did we need people to convert to, and how did we need to control people's narratives? And did we get the translation right? So many of the original books of the Bible, let's not even get into the New Testament, which was written several hundred years after Jesus. So likely none of those people who wrote those books were actual Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Most of it's Paul. Paul was years later. Paul was a tax collector who had a vision of Jesus and suddenly decided, you know what, I can tell you everything you need to know. But he also had his own opinions that got infused into there. So a lot of Christianity today is actually listening to Paul, not necessarily the words of Jesus, but Paul's interpretation of what he said Jesus was telling us to do. That's a mind blow too. So thinking about all of this, again, it's what was the intention behind the words that we're looking into. So I hope this helps. It is 11:11. We'll make a wish, and we'll let me know really quickly, you guys, if this is a container for this. There's a lot that goes into what made it into the Bible, what didn't. Most of it is about the narrative. And in more modern times, there are endeavors being made to sort of sift that out. This is where it seems that theology and religion, which always had a bit of a separate track, they are really kind of going on opposite sides of each other right now, where one is focused on like the spiritual necessity of these things, and the other is, what's the truest thing we can find in here? And also, how does it relate and include and allow for everybody else's perspective too? This is why I'm not really sure if I would, in this context, consider myself more religious than I am theological. So I hope that helps. Yeah. So I hope that helps. I hope that you guys have a really great week. I will not be here next week for our Monday Magic Mood Boost Live, but I will be back on June 2nd, and we can get into it. If there's anything else you would like to hear a rant about, I'll research it, and I will get back to you and do a rant for that. And I'll even go over time if I have to. So thank you guys so much for hanging in there with me. And it is like opening a box of sparkly things. I hope this week feels like opening a box of sparkly things. Just be really careful around Saturday. There's a lot going on. Take care of yourself. Feel your feelings. Sit with whatever you need to sit with. And I hope in the end it brings you to something incredible. Don't worry. There's really good things coming up in the astrology in the next couple of weeks. I can't wait to see you then. Bye.